The idea for Brent's Back really started in church. One Sunday I was standing there and everybody's singing around me, and as I looked around, I just felt like I was on the outside. And I got this image in my head of a guy at a party with everybody milling around, and the host of the party is at the very center of this large crowd of people having a great time. And yet the host has left a space for me. I'm welcome to come stand next to the host, be part of the party, be at the very center of everything that's going on, but I don't want to. I don't feel like being there. This really felt like the prodigal son. The older brother comes back, finds a party going in full swing, and refuses to join in because the party he feels is completely inappropriate. As I was writing, it really was a question of how do I make this story work for a modern audience? Because a lot of the cultural things from a 2,000-year-old story are lost on us today. So how do we make it so that it feels inappropriate in a culture especially where there's really little that is truly inappropriate? So it was really a struggle to find some context where people were actually going to feel the inappropriateness of this tale. Another big element that I wanted in Brent's Back is the insults that the older brother makes to the father figure in the original Prodigal Son story. And insulting an adult today is almost like par for the course. Like that's what we do. That's television. So there's nothing shocking or bothersome about doing something like that. And so I needed to come up with a way to make the father figure character be able to be insulted and be able to absorb those insults and still respond with grace and humility and love. And so how did I do that? Well, I had to change the father figure to a knocked up teenage girl, which was a scary choice. That wasn't something that I set out I wanted to do, but that was the way that I came up with to get around all of these cultural issues that we have today in understanding this really ancient story.
Smash! You could have at least had the decency to get a 2-liter! Okay, and then here...
Pedophiles and terrorists, like that's pretty extreme. Like, why don't you just stick with, like, I don't know, like homosexuals and abortionists or something? And I'd initially kind of considered that, but I almost immediately threw it out because in today's culture, abortion is just something that we do. It's a right. It's something that happens. And so for reaching an audience that's broader than just a conservative religious group, you can't have abortion as like the bad people. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Same with homosexuality. In a conservative Christian church group, this is going to work. Okay, yeah, that's the sinner that we need to invite in and all that stuff. But for the YouTube audience, homosexuality, are you kidding me? Like, why are you so judgmental? Where's the love, man? And so I needed to grasp really far out there to get people that everybody would agree, yeah, that's pretty messed up. A screaming child was foundational to the story of Brent's Back. You've got this guy who's been at work all day, who has now picked up a child who's screaming and comes home and finds a party going on for the guy who created this whole mess. And just the, oh my goodness, are you kidding me, of all of that. And I couldn't find anybody who had a screaming child. But I did have the opportunity to film with a 2-week-old baby, and that was amazing. Like, oh my goodness, like somebody's got to give me their 2-week-olds. But as a 2-week-old child, yeah, she's just gonna chill out and sleep a lot. And so I have this incredibly relaxed baby to film with, and so well, the story changes. There's no screaming child in this. I've thought about going in and adding it in post. I got a little bit of audio of a screaming child, and it wasn't going to work. It didn't work. So screaming child out. Totally relaxed baby in.
I am one of the 3 Graces, and I get to stand awkwardly and watch the 2 actually bicker at each other. So this will be fun.
In a lot of ways, Brent's Back is a study in what happens when you don't pre-produce something. Pre-production for Brent's Back was me storyboarding the shots that I wanted, but no one else was involved in this process. And for a film that's going to have about 20 people involved, that was kind of a bad a bad decision. I was the only person who knew what I wanted on set, and while I did sit down with my DP, we really didn't have time to get on the same page as far as what we were going to be filming. That's predominantly because I just didn't take the time to pre-produce. While storyboarding, I wasn't sure if certain shots were going to work or not, and so I got one of my friends to walk through a couple of the actions with me just so I could double check to make certain that the shots worked. And always cover up your logos before you start filming because it's a pain to blur them out after the fact. You don't want to bother people more than you have to. At least I don't. And so, to try and keep people happy, try and keep things moving, we shot the shots I needed with the baby first. But because I let the baby go early, that meant that when we got to other shots where I wanted to have shots of the baby, we had to find a creative way around it. So we got a pink blanket, we kind of bunched it up, and we stuck it in Cal's arms, and he wanders around with this baby that's actually a blanket. As you work on your productions, be thinking about ways that you can kind of cheat on some of these shots so that you don't have to use as many resources to get them. And swapping out a baby for a blanket was one of the ways that we were able to even make Brent's back. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible.
It's pretty obvious when you're watching Brent's back that the audio is just no good. And that's because right before we started filming, all of my audio equipment failed. So we had to work with the onboard microphone on the camera, which is the worst microphone that you can have for this kind of shoot, but we had to do it. We'd spent half an hour of our time trying to get that thing working, and with only 4 hours to shoot 7 pages of a script, we really didn't have time to monkey with that anymore. So we threw that out and shot our entire script in 3.5 hours without an external microphone. You can really hear that. It sounds terrible when you're watching Brent's back, and in a few places it sounds like the characters are underwater.
I can hold Heather if you want.
And that's because we were filming next to a refrigerator that I had not bothered to turn off. Normally I do that, but I was so frustrated with the fact that the microphone wasn't working that I just kind of said, forget it. But even with all that, I'm actually pleased with how well the audio turned out. There were a few places where my characters were practically whispering their lines, and yet I was able to pull it out enough, despite the background noise, to get a workable audio set. And sometimes you just have to go for that. Even with bad audio, even with terrible sounds going on all around you, you just kind of have to get it done. And I could have waited and said, okay, we're going to do more post work, but sometimes it's more important just to finish your film, get it done, and move on to the next thing. We didn't use any external lights when working on Brent's back. That was predominantly a scheduling issue. We just did not have time to get everything shot. Again, 7-page script, we had 3.5 hours to shoot it. So practically, we weren't going to be able to set up lights and get that all done in the time that we had allotted for this really quick guerrilla-type film that we were working on. So we just used whatever light we had, and honestly, it turned out pretty good despite that. However, there are some scenes that they're really badly lit. It's really not any good. However, we were able to cheat some of the shots, move Jessie's back a little bit, rotate her a little to let the light fall on her a little bit better. Sometimes you just have to work with what you got and make that just work for your scene. And when it doesn't work, you just move on and you keep going. So again, production now, produce something right now, whether your lighting is working, whether your audio is working, you just have to go for it and get these films done. I shot Brent's back using a new-to-me digital SLR camera, and I'd shot a few other things with it, and they turned out a little bit out of focus. That's predominantly because the screen on the back of your camera just is not that high enough resolution to find out if you're perfectly in focus. I didn't like that. So I plugged my camera into my Surface and was able to use that as a 1080p external monitor. This was fantastic because it allowed not only us to get really fine control over whether we were in focus or not, but it also allowed the DP, the camera assistant, and me to be able to watch the video while my camera operator ran the camera. So that ended up being really awesome and a really creative way of handling the external monitor.
It's amazing how many films, even relatively short films, have scenes that you end up cutting. And one of them was where Cal went into the bathroom, and the idea for that scene was to convey Brent and how he treated things in Cal's house. And
when I started cutting it, that scene just didn't work. It was too long. It didn't fit. It didn't really communicate the way I wanted to. And I've had that problem since film school, where I will write a scene and it makes sense and it's so important to me that it communicates this idea, and then when I sit down and watch it, it doesn't communicate that idea at all. And so I'm still learning and still cutting scenes from the scripts that I write.